In this video, we will show you how to replace your front lower control arm rearward bushing on the Chevy Trailblazer. This is part of your front suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so your wheel's off the ground with the suspension hanging. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to removing the center cover, all 6 of our 19mm lug nuts, and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, we have a clear view of our front sway bar link. You can see that there's a 21mm nut holding this in place to the lower control arm. Let's remove this nut. Now that we have that broken free, the next thing we'll do is continue on with a 21mm wrench here, and we'll use an Allen head socket directly in the center to continue removing that nut. Now that we have that loose, we'll continue with our 21mm wrench right on that nut. We'll use a 7mm Allen head socket directly in the center of this. Slide this out of here, give it a quick inspection. As for ours, the boot came off. You just want to make sure you press that on there so no moisture or debris makes its way in. We'll set that aside for now. Now we can start separating the control arm from the control arm bracket. To do this, we'll be using two 21mm, one to remove the nut and the other to hold the bolt. You need to pay attention to the mounting bolts here. They come through from the rear towards the front. When we go to install these, you want to install them in the exact same position. A little bit of movement from that one. We'll leave this in place for now and continue and do the same to the rear. Here. Now we can start removing each of those bolts. For this rearward one, you just have to slide it underneath the power steering rack. It might be a little bit of a tight fit. Now we can start removing those mounting bolts. Now the next thing we'll do is take hold of the control arm, carefully start pulling it away from the vehicle and down gently. While doing so, we need to be extremely careful not to damage the axle by pulling this out in a way too far. May have to use a pry bar. There we are. Once you have the control arm separated from the bracket, we can start removing the bracket from the frame. For this, you'll find that you have 3 21mm headed bolts, 2 along the back side here, and 1 right up along the front. Let's start in the back. Use a pry bar and carefully start pulling the bracket out and away. Once we have it slid away from the frame, we'll bring it right out through here. Make our way around a little bit here. Now we can get this over to the bench. Now we can start pressing out our rearward bushing from the bracket. Before we do so, it's important to pay attention to the bushing itself. Let's have a look at the brand new one here. As you can tell, the outboard side has a large ridge. That will press up against this area. So when we go to install this, we have it in the proper position. Now with that said, since the outboard side is the side with the ridge, we need to make sure we have a cup that will fit over that ridge. We don't want to hit up against it, we want to be right up against the bracket itself. This cup fits directly over it and up against the bracket as needed. Now the next thing we're going to need to have is an adapter along the inboard side here. This is going to be the area that presses the bushing into the cup to remove it. Let's grab our ball joint press and get everything set up. Slide this on here. The hardest part's just getting everything set up. It's not a race. We want to be as safe as possible throughout this entire process. Now we can remove our apparatus. The next thing we'll do is clean and inspect our mounting hole. If you're using any type of sandpaper for this, you want to be careful not to remove any of the existing material, only any debris. We don't want to cause any damage. We'll give this a quick inspection, make sure it's not cracked or damaged in any way, and we can continue on with our installation. Now we can get ready to install our brand new rearward bushing. For this, we'll take it and put it in place. Now as we go to install this, it's important to make sure that we have a cup that fits directly onto the base of the bushing on the outboard side, and a cup that will fit around the bushing on the inboard side and presses directly up against that bracket. As we start pressing this in, it's important to note that we do not need to fully press this bushing in until it bottoms out against the bracket itself. We have to leave that same small gap as when we had removed it. At this point, we'll put on our ball joint press and continue by pressing this in, making sure that we don't feel too much pressure. If we do, we'll start backing off and give it a quick inspection. Now that we have this pressed in to the same position as when we had removed the original, we can remove our apparatus. Now that we have this one fully installed, it's important to mention, whenever I'm doing one of these bushings, I always like to do them as a pair. Once you've completed that, go ahead and make your way back over to the vehicle. All right, let's get ready to install our control arm bracket. We'll take this and we'll put it in place. We have to align all three of our mounting bolt holes. We had one along the front and two for the back side there. So we want to make sure you have it in the proper position. Go ahead and align it and slide it in. You may have to apply a little bit of pressure, or even give it a loving bonk with a rubber mallet. Let's check that real quick and get the bolt through there. Once you feel as though you have it properly aligned, we'll continue on with our mounting bolts. Go ahead and start them in by hand. You can use your socket if it makes it a little bit easier. We just want to make sure it does not cross thread into place. Once we have this one started, we'll do the same to the other two, and then we'll continue on by tightening them up. Now that they're all started, we'll bottom them out. Once they're snug, you can go ahead and torque these. The front bolt is 192 foot-pounds. Move along to the two rear bolts. These are torqued to 170 foot-pounds, so a little less. Let's get this aligned. Now we can start putting in our bolts. Start with a rearward mounting bolt. This comes through from the rear towards the front, and then we'll start on our mounting nut. Have to tap this in. Start this nut on here. If you want to use some thread locker, we'll call it your prerogative. Before you tighten that, we've got our front bolt. Let's apply some pressure underneath this lower control arm. We need to bring this up into the original ride height position, and then we can continue on by tightening those two control arm bolts. Back over at those control arm bolts, we'll be using 221 millimeters. We'll hold the bolt side, tighten the nut. Put this one right here. And now we'll torque each of these to 96 foot-pounds. Release pressure from under your lower control arm, and we'll continue on to that sway bar link. We can get the nut on here. Continue tightening that nut, and then we'll torque it to 17 foot-pounds. If you find that the stud of the sway bar link spins while you're trying to tighten it, just continue using your 7 millimeter to hold that stud still. Now we can install our wheel. Start on all 6 of your 19 millimeter lug nuts. We'll bottom these out, get the wheel back on the ground, and we can torque these to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. If you have a center cover, you can put that on now. Have a look along the backside. You'll find that you have a small diagram of a valve stem. This is the valve stem on your wheel. We'll align this area and tap it into place. Okay, friend, we've got our vehicle back together. At this point, take it for a road test, listen for funny noises, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.